Good morning, everybody. When you greet people, do you greet them with your hearts or just with your words? With your heart, right? Just welcome. So take a hug from me as we're getting started here this morning, okay? So I've been asked to speak about addiction and trauma today. So the bedfellow of trauma is addiction. You know, we don't understand how often addiction is connected to the experiences we've had in our life that have been hurtful. So I wanted to talk about that today. And if this is not working well, it is on. Yeah, it's green. There we go. So, persons who experience trauma, as many of you may know personally, also experience emotional pain related to that trauma. We're hurting inside. But when you were hurt, how did it feel to keep that pain out in the open and feel it all the time? That wasn't good, right? Didn't feel good. So what do we tend to do with our pain? We tend to repress it. We tend to put it away, okay? The result of that, though, is this, that when you put the pain away and don't process it and deal with it, the negative impact of that in your body is much, much worse than the original pain itself. We store it in our body in various places, and we're going to be talking more about that. But so the point is that an addiction, whatever it may be, is an attempt to medicate that pain because the pain is there. Okay, so I want to ask you, in addition to me, how many of you are addicts? Okay, now, sometimes, thank you for those of you who raised your hands, by the way, but I'd like to suggest to you that to some degree or another, all of us are addicts to something. Not to the classic alcohol and drugs or pornography or those kinds of things that carry a lot of shame in the church, right? Ooh, those addicts, we want to keep them away, But if you really understand yourself, and I'm hoping that today some of us will learn about ourselves even more, you'll understand that all of us are medicating pain somehow when we're not taught to process our pain. So let me give you just a real quick example. Let's say you're a little child and you're playing in the park with your mommy, okay? And you kind of wander off and, just explore, just as you do your adventure, and all of a sudden a dog comes up at you. And that dog is, he's coming up at you, and what happens in your body is you feel the fear. A dog. I might get bitten. You see the dog. You hear the dog. You experience the dog. And in all of those different places, understand there's a different location in your brain for every one of those ways of experiencing the danger of that dog. Okay? Now, if your mother sees what's happening and she comes to you and says, "Oh, baby, I'm so sorry, here, come. I know that must have been terribly frightening. Let me hug you. I see you. I feel you. That must have been awful." That gives that child the possibility of processing that pain from a supportive, comforting mother, right? But if that mother comes and says, "Boy, I told you to stay near me. Why did you go off by that, by yourself? That must, you deserve to be bitten by that dog." If that's what happens, does that child have the opportunity of processing the pain, the trauma? No. Okay? The trauma stays inside. So that's just one example of the various kinds of trauma that could happen. So rather than stigmatizing addicts, ask what happened to you. What was your story? What was your story of trauma? You know, because a lot of us try to keep it in. But addicts also, do you understand that for addicts, that's their way of surviving? Addiction is a survival mechanism. And I'm going to explain more about that. So the question then is, how have you survived the pain, the trauma of your life? So I want you to think about that for a moment with me. In terms of your own journey, how have you survived the trauma, the pain that you experienced? Have you survived in healthy ways? Have you survived in ways that are hurtful to you? Which addictions, even though they're a survival mechanism, we know they always come back and hurt us too. Okay, so that's really important. Okay, if you could move to the next slide, please. Okay. There we go. So just some really basic statistics. In the U.S. alone, approximately 95,000 persons die every year from alcohol-related deaths, okay? More than 100 from drug-related deaths, 300,000 from complications related to obesity, 480,000 die from the use of tobacco. This is every year now. These deaths are related to unaddressed suffering caused by factors such as perhaps institutional racism, patriarchy, entrenched consumerism, in addition to personal family histories of trauma and loss, community trauma, those kinds of things too, being raised in a disadvantaged neighborhood, those kinds of things. So, I mean, there are many different types of trauma. So these are just some background statistics that I thought would be helpful for us to know. So I'm going to use internal family systems as a way of helping us understand this today. There are many other ways of describing trauma and its effects and the healing of it, but I'm going to use just internal family systems today as a way of framing it for us. So go on to the next slide. Okay, so how many of you are aware of the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study? Some of you are. Okay, good. So back in the mid-90s, Dr. Vincent Felitti originated the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. And the background of this was that he had a weight loss clinic, and he helped people lose weight. You know, I used to work at Weimar, and that's one of the things that we used to do there, right? But often what we experienced and what he experienced too is that after people, learned all these wonderful techniques and lost all of this weight, and they left the program feeling really, really good, about 6 months later, they might come back again, having regained a lot of that weight. And that was his experience, and he started wondering, what's going on here? Why is this happening? And so what he did is he began interviewing some of the people who had gone through the program. And as he interviewed them, he interviewed this one lady, and she was describing her experience. He was asking her questions, and by mistake he asked her this question. He said, "How old were you when you had your first sexual encounter?" And she said 4. She had been sexually molested by a family member, right? And for her, as he began unpacking this for her, her weight was a way of sending messages to men to say, I don't want to be attractive for you because I don't want another one of those kind of traumatic experiences. And that led to the ACE study, where he began taking a look at people at Kaiser Permanente Hospital in San Diego. He studied over 17,000 people, and he asked them these first 10 questions. and then correlated that with their health medical records. And he found that 2/3 of people had one or more adverse childhood experiences, that 12.5% had 4 or more, and that if you have one as opposed to none, you have a much higher probability of chronic medical illness, of mental illness, like, for example, depression, anxiety, kinds of things, and self-destructive behavior. Your own addictions, for example, or STDs, or those kind of things. And so that's why this kind of thing is so important for us to understand. So he looked at emotional abuse, where people were being put down and, demeaned and diminished by other people. Physical abuse, well, not other people, this is in their family of origin, okay? Physical abuse in your family of origin, where marks were left on your body, for example, or sexual abuse in your family, or emotional neglect. And this one is probably more frequent than a lot of us know. This is where maybe you have a parent who might be physically there, but not emotionally there for you. They don't see you, they don't connect with you. They're either disconnected from themselves, so they can't connect with you, or they may be too busy working or whatever, and you don't get seen, okay? Physical neglect, food, clothing, shelter, medical care is not there. Is there an addiction in your home? Is there family mental illness in your home? Is there domestic violence in your home? Did you have a parent who was in prison? Now, these were the original ACEs, okay? Now, also we take a look at community ACEs. The ACE study's expanded since he first did it, to take a look at, were you raised in an unsafe neighborhood? Was there bullying, in this neighborhood? Were there alcohol and drugs there? Low-paying jobs, poor housing, food deserts, those kinds of things, okay, in your neighborhood. But then they also went to look at environmental ACEs. I was delayed in my arrival here because of an environmental ACE. Can you imagine? Have you read about the devastation of the floods and all the hurricane? People losing your house, everything you own. Is that traumatic? Yeah, people lost their lives. Over 50,000 people died. So again, those kinds of things are really important. But also, for the church, this is really important. There's also spiritual trauma. I don't know if any of you understand. For example, in my own story, I was raised in a Catholic background, but I'm a good Catholic Adventist. I was too when I came in too, because so much of Adventism is similar. Perfectionism, performance orientation, your value and your worth is connected to what you do, not for who you are. Being beaten up with the Bible by your parents. See, you're not living up to what the Bible says. There's something wrong with you. Or even the writings of Ellen White, for those of us who are Adventists. So again, those kinds of things are spiritual abuse, okay? Or we have to take a look at generational trauma, which is really important, okay? In generational trauma, whatever happened to your generation's pack. Remember, the Bible says the iniquity of the fathers is visited upon the children to the 3rd and 4th generation. This happens in the genes, okay? And so even the healing of trauma has to take into account that genetic generational impact. And by the way, that is in your body too. It's not just emotional, it's in your body, okay? So let's go on to the next one. Okay, so I'm going to be sharing with you some internal family system parts, okay? So there are exile parts of you that you don't want to embrace. That's why I call them. That's why they're called exiles. We don't want to acknowledge that part. These are the parts that we repress or ignore. The parts that are particularly hurt or were traumatized. So they absorb energy. This is what happened in my past. They're past oriented. but they're also, they overwhelm us, those parts. That's why we try to keep them away. We try to exile them, okay? That's the exile parts. The next part are managers. These are the parts of us that try to make sense of life and manage life and keep us safe, okay? So they're attempting to stabilize or improve our family system, okay? And if any of you know about family systems theory, there are parts of us in our family system, and a part of it is to create what's called a homeostasis, because we don't want to live in turmoil all the time. So there's this homeostatic part of us. So we try to create a normality among the different people in our family system, okay? But this is family systems within a person, though. It's an internal family system. So we want to maintain that same homeostasis, that same, calm. But managers, they're the ones that are attempting to do that. That part of you inside. That part of you, okay? They're future-oriented, okay? We want to look to the future, improve the system, okay? They try to be proactive to cut off, anything that's going to unsettle the whole system that's inside of you. So the next part of us are called firefighters. I kind of like this one because I've been a firefighter myself. And so these are the parts that we reject or conceal. They soothe or distract from emotional pain. They're present-oriented. I need to deal with this right now. And they are reactive to stuff that happens to us. They react to try to make us feel better. Now, which of these three parts, the exile, the manager, or the firefighters, are the addict part of us? Talk to me. The firefighter parts, okay? Now, that's the most obvious answer, and it's absolutely true. But I want to ask you this. Can we be addicted to managing too? How many of us are addicted to controlling, to keep ourselves safe, to feel safe and to deal with the fear? You see, when I look at controllers, and I look at part of myself, too, there's a part of us that is trying to manage our anxiety by controlling, okay? And we need to recognize that part of us, too. I want to say this. In the church, there are a lot of managers, okay? A lot of us are unconscious managers. And a part of it is if I can see stuff and if I can control it, then I'm going to feel safer than if I can't, okay? And so a lot of us who've experienced trauma, we're looking for something to stabilize us that way, to stabilize us that way. Something that's concrete that we can kind of settle on, that we know is true and we won't have to be unsettled. And so we get kind of rigid in the way we look at even our religion. And a lot of it has to do with kind of that rigidity, managing what's going on so I can feel safe. But so these are the three parts that internal family systems looks at. But I want to go on now to the next slide. Here's the cycle that often happens related to addiction, okay? And see if any of you can relate to this. Number one, our fragile exiles activate due to external interactions or challenges in the person's life. Now, where does that activation occur? What part of us? In the midbrain, right? In the amygdala, the midbrain, that's where we experience the pain of the trauma and so forth that we experience. It activates our midbrain, not our prefrontal cortex, but our midbrain, the emotional brain, okay? Next, managers ignore or try to contain these vulnerable parts by getting busy concentrating on tasks or the needs of others, and they criticize the exile into improving. There's something wrong with that part of you. So come on, we get it together. Okay, remember, this is an internal thing that we do inside. Now, noting the exile's distress, firefighters take over. using substances or any other kind of addiction to mask the emotional pain. Okay? Exiles then feel sick, degraded, fearful, isolated. There's something wrong with me that the other parts of me have to fix me or take care of me or manage me. That makes me feel even worse. Managers then mobilize again to get operations back on track in hopes of regaining fleeting control and self-respect. Critical managers, how many of us have internal critics where we shame ourselves and put ourselves down, right? So these internal managers attack, vilify, and shame firefighters for their repeated transgressions. Okay? Firefighters return to addictive practices again to medicate pain, shame, and deny consequences. And again, exiles feel abandoned, again, hopeless, unfavorable. Do you see the cycle just continuing here? Okay. So how do we get out of this cycle? How do we get out of this cycle? Let's go on. Okay. So a healthy self is the heart of the matter. Creating a healthy self helps us, I won't say manage, but heal. Okay? So self is our seat of kind awareness, kindness to ourselves, and wakeful presence. We see ourselves as we are, and there's this other part of ourselves that we need to develop. It is the compassionate, non-judgmental witness to our experiences inside and out. Yes, I have experienced trauma. Yes, this is a part of my life. I'm not going to run from it anymore. I'm not going to try to medicate it. I'm going to try to be healthy. It's an inner place of knowing that can be obscured but not extinguished. It's that well-differentiated part of us where I have come to know me. I've come to value me. I've come to grow in knowing that I am a dearly beloved child of God, a son or a daughter of God. You see, that verse just does not only apply to Jesus. Often we tend to put it, he was the dearly beloved son in whom his Father was well pleased, and praise God for that. But do you know that you are too? A dearly beloved child of God. He does not put you down because of what happened to you or what you've done to try to survive it. He loves you just the way you are. And knowing that and internalizing that into a healthy self is what helps us then build this self that begins treating ourselves and others, by the way, with compassion. Okay? So we may ask, does this person have a self? You know, a lot of times that question is so important because so many people don't have any clue who they are. They don't have any kind of a clue of having any self. They have not been allowed to have a self. In my own life, for example, my father was so much in control in my life. You know, I'm the oldest boy of 15 kids, okay? Catholic family, no birth control, okay? No twins. And so, but my dad was so much in control of all of us in the family system. It had to be Dad's way or the highway. If it wasn't his way, then it was wrong. You weren't allowed to have a self. And if I messed up in any way, in other words, was human, made a mistake, shame, shame, shame on you. Can anybody relate to that? Whether it was that kind of finger pointing or whether it was just verbal or in any other way. You know, you can be shamed with a look too, right? Okay, so there's a lot of ways in which we were shamed. But so myself, for a long time, I did not have a clue who I was. Okay? I was taught I had to be perfect. You don't feel. You know? I was taught that anger is a sin. okay? And so don't be angry. So I put away all kind of feelings. I had no clue who I was, how I felt, until I began my own journey of healing, okay? So I recognize this question, does a person have a self? Well, they do, but they don't know who it is. And often what it is a false self that we project, a pseudo-self. This is who I think you want me to be, so I'll be that with you. And if I'm with somebody else, I'll be something else for them. Hope they don't get together, though, because then I won't really know who to please, right? We become people pleasers. So the goal is to strengthen the self that is often obscured and may have little access to moments of insight or confidence in themselves. The self may initially appear to be a simple wish for a less chaotic life. The longing to be a better spouse, a better parent or worker, or just to feel better in the morning when you get up, okay? The self may appear as an inner voice warning the addict of danger, a self connected to the Holy Spirit, because that still small voice we hear is the voice of the Spirit. This is the way, walk ye in it, loving us the way we've never been loved before. By the way, a lot of times the root of spiritual trauma is that we project onto God what our experience is of our dad or mom, our parent figures. And so when we learn that we could not trust them, we also struggle to really trust God. And a beautiful biblical model for that is, do you remember the children of Israel in the wilderness? Okay. Do you remember what was their experience before the wilderness? They were slaves. Generational slavery, right? They were even told you have to kill your own babies, your baby boys particularly, right? Is that traumatic? And in Exodus chapter 6, starting in verse 6, God spoke to Moses and said, I want you to tell the children of Israel that I love them, that I'm going to be with them. I'm going to bring them out of slavery. I'm going to take them into the promised land that I promised your ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? But verse 9 says, but they could not hear Moses because of their anguish of spirit and their cruel bondage. Because of their trauma, they couldn't hear the good news of the gospel that God was sharing with them through Moses, okay? And so they were in the wilderness for 40 years. Was that a punishment? Was that a punishment? I often thought that it was, but I don't look at it that way anymore. It was a time of learning to trust God. Let them make me a sanctuary that I might be there, dwelling among them. Pillar of fire and cloud and all of that to signify his presence. He wanted to teach them that they could trust God, right? Okay, so let's go on now. So here are 9 C's of self-energy, okay? Of self-energy. If we can learn to how to calm ourselves. And I'm going to be talking more later this morning during our breakout session about a lot more of the interventions, for trauma, but to calm yourself, okay? When you feel anxiety in your body, I want to ask you, where do you feel anxiety in your body when you do? Some people in your head, some in your neck, some in your shoulders, some in your chest, some in your lower back, sometimes in your hips, your heart, wherever it may be, in your tummy, in your legs. But when you begin experiencing anxiety, learning to take a deep breath and calm yourself down and ask, what's happening with me right now? Having that kind of self-insight into yourself is a real important part of your journey of healing. Being aware of what how my body reacts and responds, okay? I love this one, being creative. Learning learning to be creative, whether it's artistic creation or whatever that kind of creation might be, is important. My creativity is, I love the backyard. And I love building in the backyard, creating in the backyard, making rose gardens and waterfalls and, all kinds of stuff in the backyard. To me, that's my creative outlet. I love that kind of stuff. Okay? Being connected. Right now the Surgeon General has told us that there's an epidemic of loneliness in this country, particularly post-COVID, An epidemic of loneliness. People feel disconnected. But you know what? In church families, when this church is filled with people, how many people really feel connected? You can be lonely even in the midst of a crowd if you don't feel safe to connect with other people. If you don't feel safe, you can be lonely. And you might smile and say happy Sabbath. My wife Beverly tells a story of, she was in church. Let me just give you a little background of her journey. When her mother was carrying her in the womb, she tried to abort her. Okay, very consciously. I don't want to be pregnant. So she took, an excess of pills to try and have an abortion. It didn't work. Okay? When she was 3, she was molested by her uncle. Okay? When she was 5, her father took them all on a nice drive one Sunday morning after church. Okay? But he stopped the car. This is the inner city of Cleveland, Ohio. Stopped the car under a bridge and said to her this, Beverly, you've been a bad little girl. We don't want you in the family anymore. Get out. Her mother opened the car door. They put her out and drove away. Can you imagine the trauma of yourself being a 5-year-old little girl, being told, you've been a bad little girl, we don't want you anymore? Having your mother, instead of standing up and fighting for you and saying, if you're going to put her out, I'm getting out too. But there had been so much domestic violence in the home that mom had no voice to stand to protect her baby. They put her out, drove away. How would you feel if that were you? Okay? Now, with all of this another background of shaming and put down and all of that, they moved to a new project when she was 13. And there was an older boy in the project who saw her and said, ooh, yeah, let's get together. And he said to her, if we have sex, there's a chance in a million that you'll get pregnant the first time. Guess what? She was that statistic. And so when she was 14, she had Eric. Okay? Her father told her, you're damaged goods, so no man will ever want you. Okay? That was after she had Eric. And of course, she brought shame upon the family and all of that, right? That's a little bit about her story. And so one day, this is before I met her, she was in church. She became an Adventist, by the way, at 14. Someone sent her Voice of Prophecy lessons, and she became an Adventist. And she became a good church member, but she didn't know Jesus yet. But she knew the church stuff. So one day, she was in church, and she was really depressed, feeling, almost like wanting to die. And people would come up to her, and greet her, and guess what she would say? Happy Sabbath. How many of us do that? Instead of being able to have our churches be safe places where we can be and become healed. Happy Sabbath. We play this put on the front, okay? But we're disconnected. Compassionate is another C of self-energy. We get energy by being compassionate to others as well as being compassionate to ourselves. Okay, giving, our ministries in the church. Developing confidence, is self-energy. It creates energy for us to be confident in our abilities. I know what I'm capable of doing. God has given me certain gifts, and so I'm confident in using these gifts from God for God's purposes. Finding clarity about certain things gives us energy as well. A lot of times there is confusion, but when we find some clarity about things, about our story, pieces start falling into place, and we feel more energy. Having courage. Do you know what kind of courage it takes to begin a healing journey? To address the pain of the trauma in your story? But when we do, energy comes. We grow through that, huh? Curiosity. I wonder, what happened to me? Or what was my wife's story or my parents' story? Why did they treat us or act the way that they did? I wonder what their story was. That kind of curiosity, builds energy. And finally, I love this one, choice. To know that we have choice, that we are not condemned to follow what other people tell us, but that we can make choices ourselves and not have to do what daddy said or mama said just because it's daddy or mama or some other authority figure. But that I have a choice. God wants me to have a choice. God created us as people with a choice to obey or to disobey. But we had choice from the beginning. And he wants us to know that we have choice even now. Okay, and let's go to the next one. So exploring the self. Can you name 20 positive adjectives to describe yourself? Could you? See, when I give people this exercise, can you name 20 positive adjectives to describe yourself? A lot of them want to say things, well, I'm loving and I'm kind and that kind of thing. Are those adjectives to describe you alone or you in relationship with someone else? You see, each of us have two forces that are constantly in tension with one another. One is individuality force, who am I alone? The other one is togetherness force. Who am I in relationship to somebody else? Okay? And a lot of us, when we don't know who am I alone, we've never explored that part of us. Who am I alone? We end up defining ourselves by what we do in relationship to somebody else. And when you don't know that, are your relationships then healthy? Probably codependent. Unhealthy relationships because you don't know who you are. You've not figured that out. And so you give and give and give, and you're unhealthy and all kinds of unhealthy dynamics in relationships. And so that's why it's important to explore, who am I alone? So could you name 20 positive adjectives to describe you as a person alone? Like I'm determined, I'm creative, those kinds of things. Okay? So, have you written out your story to uncover the hidden parts of yourself and experiences that have been painful for you? Now, one of my first assignments in my marriage and family class in the seminary was to have people write out their stories, do a genogram, look at 3 generations back and look for patterns, that you see among your parents, grandparents, aunts, and uncles, and try to figure out, what am I getting to me that came from generations past? What is my story? What is our family story? Okay? Now, but I also give people kind of an activation warning that when you do that, some of the pain that may come up could be old pain that gets triggered, that gets activated through the stories that you write or that you hear. And so if that happens, how do you process that? Well, we're going to be talking about that later, but certainly having a counselor, a therapist, someone that you can process that with who's maybe trauma-informed, right, would be perhaps the best thing to do. But this is a part of self-discovery. Who am I? Who am I? Okay, why am I doing what I'm doing? How much of it has been to survive? Now, here are some wisdom. Janina Fisher is someone who I have studied under a little bit in terms of trauma. So look at what she suggests. Don't let the past own you. In other words, don't let it determine why you do what you do in the present. The more you process the past, the more you can make your own decisions about how you function in the present. Okay? Triggering or activation is your body's way of being overprotective. Okay? It's your body trying to protect you from what happened to you and what's still in there. Recovery is about balance in your life, because we can either be at one extreme or the other extreme, all or nothing thinking. But a lot of us have trouble living in the area of gray with that uncertainty. So many people want certainty in their life, okay? And I think that's why some people get into rigidity and don't see things, but certainty. So it's about balance. You are here now, not there. So a question to ask if you feel activated is, even though my body feels anxious, feels activated, am I in danger right now? Or am I safe? No matter how I feel, asking myself, am I safe right now? It's a good question to ask. Living in the here, not back then. Growth comes from the decisions we make, even if they feel wrong at the moment. But making a decision rather than having everyone else tell you what to do, making your own decisions is a point of growth for you, okay? Ask, how did I survive? How did I survive? We discussed that a little bit, but how did I survive all of this? Wow, I'm resilient, am I not? If I survived all of this, I have some resilience built into me. Practice noticing and naming your feelings. Again, I was taught not to feel, and so when I began this journey, I have no clue how I feel. So I had to get myself a list of feeling words, and when I would be living life and something would happen, I had no idea how I felt. So I had to look up my feeling words, and I began describing, I feel sad, or I feel whatever. I had to train myself to feel, because I couldn't do it. Okay? Change your relationship with pain. Rather than we want to put it away, rather than do that, the relationship with pain I'd like to suggest to you is that you embrace it. That you embrace it. What is it teaching me? How can I grow through it? You see, if you don't embrace your pain, can God come and comfort you in that place of pain? He does not force healing on you. It's only when you embrace it and give him permission, make requests, God, I need your comfort now, that he'll come and be the God of all comfort for you. Okay? Practicing setting healthy boundaries. For how many of you is it comfortable for you to say no? Or do we feel like we have to say yes every time? Okay? Setting healthy boundaries. I would prefer not doing that. Or I can't do that right now. Maybe I could get to it next week. Or whatever it may happen to be. Boundaries are indicators that you have a healthy self. A healthy self. Recovery is a journey, not a destination. Our church has a Christ-centered 12-step program that I'm going to be training about the next 3 evenings, not tonight, but starting Monday evening. And so it's called Journey to Wholeness. And the destination is being with God every moment of the journey. It's not as if I've attained, Paul said, but I'm pressing forward toward the mark of the high calling, which is in Christ Jesus, right? And it's okay to take baby steps. And of course, in addiction, sometimes we even relapse. So there might be a step back. But when we do, if we give ourselves grace rather than beating ourselves up, we can then begin taking more baby steps forward, right? So don't condemn yourself. Use a relapse as an opportunity to grow rather than an opportunity to beat yourself up. Okay? An opportunity to grow. So we have about 3 minutes left. Any comments or questions that you'd like to ask? Yeah. The one thing I've learned is that I cannot control how other people are going to respond or react. Okay? But I've also learned this, that the more I have learned to appreciate and love and care for myself and have a healthy self, when they react, I don't also have to react in turn. I can hold on to myself and say, you can react that way if you want, but I'm going to take a picture of my wife up here, and then we'll let you do whatever you want to do, but that's what I'm going to choose to do. So the more I can hold on to myself, the healthier I'm going to be, regardless of whether other people choose to be healthy or not. I don't know if that's at all helpful to you, but...
That's what I wanted to hear, and I'm going to try and do it. The second thing, you said train yourself to feel. I've never heard that before. Maybe you did it, but could you say just a couple more things about how you would train yourself to feel?
Well, today, if you look online, there are all kind of feeling wheels. If you kind of Google feeling wheels, you can download feeling wheels, which have all kinds of feelings in them. Some of them are more core feelings. Some of them are more external feelings. But before that technology existed, I just got feeling words, a list. And I kind of just, when something would happen, I would stop and ask myself, how do I feel about this right now? Because I didn't know. And so I would just say, I'd look at my list of feeling words and I'd pick one out that really felt, like it really resonated with how I felt at that moment. Sad or happy or upset or whatever it may happen to be. I just had to practice it. I had to kind of program my brain to begin doing what I should have been able to do in a healthy self all along.
Thank you. That was very helpful.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. I love the story about your wife being kicked out of the car. I got kicked out of the car too, except for I was in northern Idaho, and the difference is I was glad to get out of the car, and I was sad when she came back to get me. But that aside, growing up in the 60s and 70s, we were always told the solution to all of our problems was to study and pray more. And not saying that's a bad thing. And so I would delve into the writings in the Bible and pray. And I found a lot of strength and help there, but it never really fixed anything. And I would go back to my mom and study and pray. You're not studying and praying enough. So it was an endless cycle of being told to study and pray and misbehaving well within the rules and regulations that we were brought up in. And it was discouraging. And today, except for in this sort of, you're using the psychosocial and medical model to describe some of these things, but we're still told in our churches, you just aren't praying enough, don't have enough faith.
Yeah.
So get over it, mister, and move on. Other than, do you have any response to that? Or I don't mean to condemn the church, but I believe that's pretty much our experience.
Sadly, you're absolutely right. It is. At Andrews University, we've developed an international center for trauma, care, and education. Okay? Because we've recognized that when we use those simplistic things, which are, again, I love to pray, but we don't even know. I'm going to be demonstrating some things during our next segment when I'm going to be doing the breakout group. I'm going to be demonstrating some things about how we can pray in ways that are really healing, not just the regular old, read the Bible and pray more, try harder. That doesn't work. That doesn't work. And there are beautiful biblical interventions that we've just never been taught about how we can use experiential biblical models to help us. So I'm going to be exploring some of them. But your mom probably was teaching you what she knew rather than, but that's all she knew. She meant well, it sounds like, but she was limited because we as a church, when we're not trauma-informed, are limited in how we can really help. So, okay.
Appreciated everybody's sharing. I watch a podcast that's called The Lifeboat, and the person that started it, his whole theme is the opposite of addiction is connection. Mm-hmm. And it's only by watching that constantly have I started understanding that. Mm-hmm. And when we found out about this convention, it's been an answer for prayer for years. So I thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I have my swim trunks on again, not because I'm just missing the cold plunge, but because we're going to do a baptism, and we're really excited about it. Yeah. And just to share real quick, I asked him if he wanted anyone to be there, and he first said no. But then in that, he processed through, and I really feel like it's just the environment that we have here. And he said, you know what? That's what my old self would have done. So I would really like people, if they could come. The baptistry is just right here behind this speaker. So we're just going to allow them to go get changed. So if you want to, you can just come over here, enjoy the baptism with us, celebrate with him. And then if you want to go have chai, I think it's available. But if you do want to experience that with Anthony and community, that would be great. And then we'll go have chai. And then we'll be back around 11 o'clock back in here. So thank you.